Welcome and thanks for joining us for another episode of Twice Told Tales. In this episode, we're talking to Janice from Tehran. So Janice, could you introduce yourself and tell us about life in Tehran?
Yeah, I'm obviously originally from Australia. I was born in Melbourne and my family are in Canberra, which is the administrative capital of Australia. It's a very small place. It's a lot smaller than Tehran. And in fact, the first time I came to Iran, I decided I would come to Isfahan because I was less scared that it would just be too big. But now I've got used to the big city and I live in Tehran. I've been living here probably for on and off since September 2014, I started my master's here. I've been back to Australia a couple of times since then, not since Corona, but I'm going soon, inshallah. So, yeah, for the most part of the last, I suppose, seven or so years.
Great. And when were you studying, or when were you in Isfahan? Because you said that first you decided to go to Isfahan, right?
Yes, my whole experience in Iran has started with a series of various accidents. And the first accident was that I had to choose a different language in my degree apart from Arabic. And I was lazy, so I thought, oh, what about another language with the same alphabet? So I chose Persian. And then after that, we were supposed to go to Jordan for a school trip. And we weren't able to go because of insurance issues. And I had been living very frugally for the previous 2 years and saving all my money so that I could go. And, I was 20 something and I wanted to spend the money. So I decided that I was going to come to Iran instead after my Persian teacher suggested that I could give it a try. And so that meant that I was here in the Persian year 1385-86, which is 2007. So that was quite a long time ago. It was a very different place. And it was very cold. And yes, the first period was very difficult because I'd never been overseas before. And all of a sudden I was in Isfahan. And but the last couple of months I really enjoyed. And I think that's probably what made me want to keep coming back here.
Yeah, and by the way, that's the time when I was studying at Isfahan University.
Oh, really? Maybe I saw you one time. We didn't know.
Yeah, we never met, but that's exactly I was doing my third year of bachelor's in 2007. So.
Oh, well, there you go. I was also in my at least second or third year, maybe third year also. So maybe we're the same age. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your degree in that required 2 languages?
It was called languages. In fact, It was a strange name. Yeah, we did some linguistics. We had to learn 2 languages, which is a really bad way to learn one language. Just try to learn 2 at once. And then we also studied. We had to pick politics and religious and kind of social subjects that related to the area in which the language is spoken. So it was kind of like, I suppose, more often known as area studies, but they called it languages and they put language in the center. And that suited me because I like linguistics as well. So I was able to do a couple of subjects.
Oh, well, that's great. Did you ever make it to Jordan?
I'm sorry?
Did you ever make it to Jordan? Did you ever go to Jordan?
Nope, never been to Jordan. But I did get to Damascus for a few months in, I think, 2010 before the war. And I'm really grateful that I went then because it was obviously a good time to go. And at that point, my colloquial Arabic got a lot better. But unfortunately, I can't remember anymore. It was at the stage of arguing with, taxi drivers and, other important things for a living somewhere. I said I found Iran a little easier.
Oh yeah, I can see that. I've traveled in the Levant and lived in the Levant, and so I can see where that would be. There's something about my short time in Iran where I could say that it seemed a little bit more, society seemed a little bit more cohesive than I experienced in Jordan or the other Arab countries that I've lived in. Palestine. Palestine is probably the outlier. It's a very cohesive society, but that's probably more to do with the oppression that they all face together. But definitely Jordan is it's an amazing country that it actually is able to be governed the way it is, because it's pure chaos. But yeah, I found Iran to be pretty.
Well, as I said, I had only one chance to go there, and I've never been, so I'll have to trust you on that one.
I hope you could go. It's an interesting place. I actually was going to say I know an Australian linguist there who wrote the book in Australia on Arabic. So I don't know if she's also an archaeologist. I don't know if you.
Oh, she sounds cool.
Yeah, she would be the person that you would know if you went there, because she's
okay.
Heavily involved in the Arabic language studies in Australia. But
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, it was a bit of chance too, because when you're a foreigner, you usually live in, you just live somewhere. You don't really necessarily plan it, and you just are there, and you just deal with what's in front of you. And I guess my particular experience in Damascus was that I live around the corner from a brothel, and I'm white, and there's a lot of white business women, and so it was sometimes not quite the place that you'd really want to be, and that's fine. I never felt unsafe, but I sometimes did feel annoyed. But I came back to Iran, and everybody has to wear hijab, so I was no longer able to be recognized as a foreigner from behind. So this gives you, quite a little bit more freedom, because people do notice if they pay attention that you're foreign, but they don't notice if they don't pay attention. And a lot of the time they're not. They're too busy asking everybody they meet, where is such and such a shop? And they don't look at people's face before they ask. They just ask, because in Iran, it's best to answer if someone asks for directions. It doesn't matter if you know or you don't know where something is. You can't say, I don't know. You've got to say, oh, just a bit further on to the right, And so people just keep asking you, and sometimes it's something that foreigners often find in Iran. They say, oh, nobody realizes I'm foreign. They keep asking me for directions, and I say, well, they would realize if they looked at you. It's just that they're so programmed to keep asking everybody on the street where the metro is until they can, collect average information of which way it probably is.
That's hilarious.
In this case, and that kind of made me feel all of a sudden a little bit more comfortable. And also, I guess the other thing is that Iranians are very political, and they talk about politics all the time, including, in the taxi on the way back from the airport. Whereas the political conditions in Syria at the time were not like Iran at all. So you wouldn't hear many conversations about politics. You get people sort of closing the windows and not wanting to sort of the kind of trust within society is perhaps a bit lower. And I guess and the sort of freedom of expression was maybe a little bit different too. So in Iran, you kind of you can be a lot more comfortable, and people are a lot more comfortable in saying what they want to say, and it's not like everybody's closing the windows wondering if there's somebody listening or something like that. And even if they are, that's probably not going to be an issue. But so it was quite a different environment even then. That's now like more than, I don't know, it was a few years ago. I don't like to think of how many years ago it was that we were in undergraduate.
It's actually famous that when you when you're in Iran, everyone is talking about politics, as if there is some expert or something, especially on taxis. That's very, it's quite
it's
well
very
known
common.
The taxi, yes, they talk.
Yes.
And the thing is, it's what you hear from people on the street or in the taxi or everywhere. It's sometimes different. They want to make a conversation, and they usually, because everyone is interested in politics, they start with politics, but it doesn't necessarily reflect what they actually believe, or they actually politically act based on that. believe. Like you can hear people say ideas that, like, when it comes to political actions or like taking part in elections or things, it could be very different from what they were talking about. So that's why the Iranian society is usually very difficult to predict, like how they will act in certain elections or on certain cases.
Sure, but it's a very different situation in Syria, where people didn't have that level of discussion. Because in Iran, you can hear anything. You can hear the most ridiculous things that, make absolutely no sense. But people are quite happy to say that to you, especially to a foreigner. Whereas in Syria, people don't want to say anything. And I just noticed, because of the difference in the environment, that Australia, we often complain about politicians as well, and it's kind of a normal thing to talk about. Why is this? Why is that? It doesn't mean that we're going to overthrow our constitutional monarchy. It's just kind of whinging, and there's a lot of that in Iran. And I guess I feel more comfortable with it because yeah, it's a normal conversation. It's just the weather. The state of the roads, the politics, I don't know, however expensive something is. It's the same kind of sort of public whinging that we engage in also in Australia. And as you say, it's certainly not to be taken as any kind of indication of how people are going to behave in politics, but it can be an indication of how people relate to each other in a society, and what they talk about, and how they find something in common, as you said, to talk about.
It's interesting. So the discourse of just like public discourse in Iran, you feel it's very open. It's very free for people to say what they want to each other and not fear retribution.
No,
wow.
Unfortunately, sometimes you wish people would just keep things to themselves, but they don't.
Well, so how would you judge that in comparison to Australia? Do you think it's almost equal in terms of the freedom people have this in their mind?
Lot more political society. So in Australia, I worked for a period of time in the Australian Senate, which is one of the two houses of Parliament in Australia. And if I went outside the major capital cities, I would have to explain to people what the Senate was. Now, that's not something that you will ever have in Iran. That people know, like the capitals of every other country in the world, they're fully aware of what's happening in their own domestic politics as well as international politics. And I think it's partly a product of the condition that they're in, because in Australia, we don't really need to care about international politics because never really anything happens. But in Iran, it's really important, or it can be important. So yeah, people are a lot more conscious of it.
And do you have
Go ahead.
Or did you ever guess, like, where there certain sources that people got their information from? Or, like, do you think the education system played a role? It was just their concern because, for example, that they're always under some sanctions, and they're like the fate of their economy depends on a lot of external factors as well as internal factors. What do you think? Can you guess what exactly was the source where people got their information, or what inspired them to keep up to date to the political developments of their country and the countries around?
Well, I guess I can think of three different sources, and they're all kind of in a mix. One is that international politics and politics affects people's day-to-day lives in terms of how expensive things are. I don't know whether or not they can send their kids overseas to study, how the currency is, going, whether they're feeling threatened. I remember at one point we bought a lot of canned food items because when Trump assassinated General Soleimani, because we in our house started worrying, like, okay, what is this person going to do next? And it was really unpredictable, and it could have impacted our own lives. I mean, it's ridiculous to think about it now, but at that time, it seemed quite scary. And I think that immediacy is one source. Another source, I think, and two sources. One is domestic media, and the other one is international media. And that sometimes we have in Iran, or I see, at least from my perspective, I see two kind of discourses, and sometimes those discourses and those people don't even talk to each other, and I think that I have a whole range of opinions on that as well. But when you have one part of the society that's getting their news from overseas and getting their content from overseas, they develop a very particular understanding of Iran, and they start seeing what they're reading rather than looking and then reading. And that we have that also on the other side, of course, and that we have people who are relying on news or relying on what they see, and sometimes you can find there's some some conflict. Like last week it was kind of a religious event in Iran, and for the first time that I noticed, at least, they closed quite a lot of Valiasr Street, which is the main sort of drag of Tehran, and they had a procession, and that was so busy. It was just full of people, and some of these people were looked like you, Setore, and some of them looked like me. They were kind of just wearing their hijab in a not very committed way. So there is a range of different people who were coming out to participate in this event, and then there are other people who sit at home and listen to the whatever media they're consuming from overseas, and they have a completely different idea of what's going on in Iran. And they think that, I don't know, nobody wears hijab anymore, and nobody's religious, and everybody's just waiting for a country to come and invade them. And this kind of idea, this kind of conflict of ideas is, I guess I have a lot of criticism of Australia. I don't think that I'm not criticizing critical in general, but I do think that a little bit of talking to people that are not like us is a good idea, and that in fact that there are a range of different kind of people in Iran. There's a lot of different people in Iran, and all those people are in Iran, and so there is no real reason not to talk to each other when we're here in Iran. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of like this discussion of politics everywhere in the street, because at least people are talking to each other. They're on the street, they're experiencing things, and they're having a real discussion about what they're really seeing. But other times people have discussions about what they're reading. And I guess what I was trying to say in terms of how busy this procession was last week and how everybody was out there, that if you read things like, oh, people were only there for the ice creams, well, conditions are difficult in Iran, but it's still possible to buy yourself an ice cream. You don't have to go to, the main drag of Valiasr, walk for 20 minutes through the crowds just so that you can get an ice cream. It's just a very strange perception that you wouldn't necessarily, that you might read about, but you probably wouldn't see.
What was the theme of this event in the streets? Why it was?
Oh, it was the occasion where the Prophet Muhammad designated Ali as his successor. So it's obviously much more important for Shia, because for Sunnis they believe that the Prophet Muhammad was talking about Ali as his friend and as his family member. But Shias believe that he was designating Ali as the leader of the community, the Muslim community. So it's very exciting for Shias, and they got very excited, and they were like, people, I didn't believe it, Cesare. There were like people wearing on stilts in dress-ups, like at the corner of Fatimih. Like, I really haven't seen this before for this particular festival.
What were they
it was
dressed
really
like?
nice. There were some people on stilts, like on wooden stilts.
Yeah, but what was their costume on the stilt? Were they just
like wearing colors and just general celebrating?
Like the Mardi Gras.
Big celebration. Yeah, it's like Shias believe it's a big celebration. That's something like I have never seen, and it's the first time I'm here. Yeah.
No, this year was really big.
Yeah, because we didn't
denigrate that
as big in Isfahan, obviously, but the one in Tehran, I heard and I saw pictures and like videos. It was really huge. Like it was a massive gathering of people with all sorts of celebration, and that's true. Like obviously because Tehran is much bigger and there's a larger population. Usually, those kinds of festivals are bigger and more vibrant than, for example, in Isfahan. I mean, in Isfahan, it's we usually go to the square for I don't know, like rallies and celebrations, but it's smaller, and there's just like there's not as many I don't know, like things going on as you just mentioned. This is really interesting for me that on some
it was huge. It was really huge. I was
But
really surprised.
Who would denigrate like a peaceful like celebration like that as just free ice cream? Like what's the motivation of that kind of speech?
Oh well, that's not for me to comment on why people do that, but they do, and
Wow.
when we read in the news such things in the news that people go to celebrations for the free ice creams or the free drinks or the free whatever it is, it's really kind of funny because it's so unrealistic. Because really, it's a lot of trouble for an ice cream.
But it tells you about their psychology, the person who's saying that, more than it tells you about the event.
Maybe they really want an ice cream.
I'm curious, like, what would motivate that kind of like fear of the Shia unity or something like that, or I don't know.
It's a general thing that gets said about any time there's any gathering in Iran that is not some kind of opposition movement. It tends to be labeled a free something or other. And it's usually a very small thing. Yeah, so it's I guess it's not a very realistic perspective, but it also gets it gets reinforced because people then read in BBC or whatever radio they're listening to that, people just went there for the free ice creams, and then they start telling their friends in Tehran that those people just all went there for the free ice creams. They don't really want to be there. I think, okay, it's a long way to go, but but maybe Setara has more experience in this.
Well, yeah, I remember at some point, like there have been different things like free ice cream, or at some point there was free Sandis, as we say, which was a brand of like those canned, drinks and things. And the idea is that like for them, anything as big as that cannot be organized. Like they think that if something is organized by some governmental body, be it even the municipality, people won't go because like everybody is against the establishment, so they wouldn't go. If they go, it's only because they want to get an ice cream or a free drink or free food. It cannot be any other reason. Whereas like, especially this event that you mentioned, I'm pretty sure there were a lot of people who didn't necessarily agree with the establishment, but because it's a religious event and many people wanted to attend only because of like their religious beliefs and not necessarily endorsing any, I don't know, like political idea or whatever. But yeah, because they want to say that no, the government does not have the power to organize something as big as that and with people turning in.
Yeah, it's mainly just delegitimizing. So it's a way of saying that when people gather for us, it's because they really want to be there and they believe in their hearts. And when people gather on other occasions, it's because they want free stuff.
But also, I think if it's coming from foreign media, it probably is showing the insecurity and the threat that unity among Iranians, like apolitical unity among the Iranians, it poses to Western aims in the region, which is destabilization and fracturing of the country into groups where there isn't unity. So, like, if you see a large unity that isn't, like you said, an opposition protest, it has to be labeled as some sort of freak thing because there's no way Iranians could be a cohesive group of people. That's sort of how I would guess if it's coming from the West.
Yeah, sure. And as Setara said, there are some people that went because they wanted to have fun. There are some people who were like, hey, let's celebrate. There are some people who were like, this is really important for me and my religion. There are some people who are like, oh, Valiasr is closed. What's going on? Let's go and have a look. But all of those reasons tend to be just sort of reduced to one sort of off the hand comment that, oh, it couldn't be anything.
Yeah, well, that would make sense from that. And like your comment before, also that in Australia or in the U.S., this same like view of the outside is perpetuated. Like just you're talking about like being free to talk about politics in Iran would be something that Americans would say is not possible. They would say, if you said, which country would you be more likely to talk about politics in, and you put a list, Iran would be at the very bottom, because the idea is like, Iranians are oppressed people. The mullahs prevent any kind of fun or joy, and so it's like there's this whole narrative where, and in the inside of Iran, you're getting from the same source, the same Western capital-controlled media, you're getting the same narrative about inside of Iran, and this imaginary state that doesn't exist with your eyes. It only exists, or only exists when you read about it, not when you see it. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and just a side note, Valiasr is, as far as I know, at least up to some time, was the longest street in the Middle East. That's like how, I just want to give you an idea, like how long the street is, and the whole thing was closed for the procession. And for
How long is it?
It wasn't, the whole thing wasn't closed. It was closed from, I think it was closed from Meydan Valiasr until Parkway. So the whole thing is like 18 Ks.
Yeah.
But it was,
Wow.
the most busy part of it was closed. So I don't know, because those bits down south near Jamhuri have got a lot of busyness. There's a lot of motorbikes going on there. They probably couldn't have managed that. And also Bait is there. But from the center, I guess the center to the north part of the city, which is probably the more affluent part of Tehran, the main sort of drag for, I don't know how many Ks it would be from Meydan Valiasr, from Valiasr Square to Parkway, but it was a lot. It was a lot that was closed.
And during the festival time, when ordinary time, this street is like a walking street where there's walking and shops? Or...
there's both. There's walking and shops, and there's also cars are allowed to go one way for quite a bit of the time, and then the fast bus. It's like a tram, because it's like a bus with its own lane. That's the bus sort of lane.
Wow.
And then that lane is also full of motorbikes and cyclists, and diplomats and foreign guests, and there's a lot of competition for that lane. It's quite funny. But yeah, it's fun. One time I was riding a bike because I don't know if you have Bidud in Isfahan, but in Tehran there are these bikes that you hire with your Bluetooth on your phone, just like a normal, I don't know, in other cities you can hire bikes in this way in the world. And at that point they hadn't told people who were riding these bikes to get out of that lane. So there were so many like cyclists in the lane. And then I saw these police. I was like, oh yeah, whatever. There are police everywhere, in Iran. There's a lot of traffic police. So I kind of didn't pay much attention. Then one of them said to me, oh, could you just get off the road? And I was like, oh. And he's like, please wait. I was like, oh. And then I realized there's like 8 diplomatic cars.
Oh, wow.
So I think it was some important visitor. I felt bad because I thought, oh, I hope the visitor doesn't think that, that it's hard to clear Valiasr, but really it is hard to clear because it's a really busy street and there's just, a lot of competition.
It seems like a terrible place to drive if you're a diplomat worried about security.
No, it's the best place because it's actually possible to drive because you're only in competition with, a few motorbikes, some cyclists, and some buses. Whereas if you, the police and traffic police and, various diplomats and other people. Whereas if you try to go on a normal Tehran, highway, you're not going to get there in much of a hurry. So it's a much better idea to be maximizing the bus lanes as a diplomat.
That sounds great.
I don't think diplomats are supposed to drive in the bus lanes though. But there's always a bit of tension about who should be driving in the bus lanes. We'll have to get the Iranian police to join one of your future interviews, and they can set the record straight.
It's interesting that you described like a very like pedestrian friendly environment. Maybe not with so much motorcycles and things, but
it is. My dad is blind and he feels much safer here than in Australia, because in Australia people are very sort of bolshy about their lanes. Like if they're driving in their lane, they're going to keep going in their lane. That's their right. Whereas here, people are so used to people just, crossing the road and walking around. They just drive around you. So, nobody wants to hit somebody because that would just hold everyone up, wouldn't it? So much better to just drive around them. Off we go. And that's how it works.
I've noticed that too in driving for example, I drove around Central Asia, and like in that part of the world, like when you drive, your focus is on the obstacles in your way. But here in the US, your focus is on paint and lights, like your painted lines on the street and lights. That's mainly what you focus on. You're focused on like the pedestrians and the whatever in the lane is really become secondary because those are occasional, not expected things. But in like Central Asia, the paint and the lights almost have no bearing unless there might be a police in the distance.
Well, it does depend. I mean, on the busy streets, especially in peak hour, you get people just driving in their lanes and just trying to get to where they're going. And so we definitely see that in Iran. But I guess Valiasr, because it's got this kind of twilight zone with the bus lane, it's just a little bit more fun.
Right. Okay, so it's just like a gray zone of legal driving or something.
Yeah.
The traffic police in Iran is more forgiving than probably most other places, I would say. Don't you think?
There's a lot more negotiation.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can even negotiate for a ticket, like to reduce the price or just not to
or not to pay it.
Yeah, exactly.
But do they wave you down and expect you to stop, or do they chase you? Because in America, they chase you.
No, I haven't seen chasing. Personally, I haven't experienced chasing. But that was another thing that was different in Damascus. In Damascus, I shouldn't speak too badly, but it's possible to discuss bribery with the police straight away. Like you don't need to. The police don't bother to say what it was that you did. They just say a price, and then you say a price, and nobody has a discussion like, oh, you parked in the wrong place, or you're speeding. There's no discussion. It's just all a bargaining exercise. But in Tehran, I don't want people to think that there's bribery of the traffic police. There's not, but there is discussion with the traffic police as to whether they're going to collect the fine or not, and so sometimes we have a bit of a discussion, but it's not that you can, like, I know people that try to pay police a different amount so that they won't write the ticket, but the police are not interested in that because they know that if they get caught by the one above them, then it's not going to be fun for them.
But there is some interesting thing in the flexibility of that, because you might, as a Westerner, might look at that and be like, oh, like that's not the actual letter of the law. But the problem is here, it's so much the letter of the law that police use it as a way of fundraising for their department. So, for example, I got like a $750 traffic ticket because they instituted this new law here that on the highway, you have to slow down to below the speed limit. Everyone drives like 10 miles over the speed limit. You have to slow below the speed limit if there's an emergency vehicle on the side of the road, or you have to get over. And so this was a law that was, it's actually really kind of dangerous to implement because if traffic is flowing and there's cars everywhere, you can't get over and you can't slam on your brake. So they made these sting operations where they would sit right around the corner of the highway where you couldn't see them and you couldn't slow up
past
in
the
time.
Hospital?
Yeah, exactly. And they just have emergency vehicle there, and then they have a sting operation where they just churn out $750 tickets. I mean, that's enough to break an entire family where they would lose their house. Like a lot of people run on a really fine line of being able to afford rent and food, and so I was like, this is insane. And they do that because it's the letter of the law. Like normally you would, in Iran, it would be like, oh, come on, you did that intentionally to trick me, and you'd be able to negotiate, I assume, with the police and be like, this isn't, and they would be like, yeah, okay, there would be some level of justice you could get from the ground up. But here so there's, I don't know how to define that.
There is a bit of that here because, for example, we have certain areas that you're not allowed to go in if you didn't pay like in advance to want to drive in the center of the city of Tehran because it's really busy, and the issue of privacy like that we have in the West is probably not as strong here. So people will get an SMS fine as soon as they pass the camera. Whoops. Looks like you drove past.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there are definitely areas that, especially there's quite a bit of automation in Iran. There's actually more automation in Iran than there is in Australia in some areas. And that's one of the areas of automation is not driving in the designated center part of Tehran unless you've got your permission or so it's your day or it's your number plate day or whatever it is. But I think it's changed now. I don't think they used to have odds and evens like based on the number plate.
Right.
But I think now it's just everybody. If you want to go in that, if you want to drive around that center area, I think you have to pay. I don't think it's the odds and evens anymore, but I don't know.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know much about Tehran, but like in Isfahan, I know that there used to be something like that, and there still is. But for some time during the pandemic, they also canceled that because they were saying like they
yeah,
on the public transportation because they feared getting the virus. So like that law was canceled for a long time.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure that it's active in Tehran at the moment because I've seen some face masks over people's number plates, and that can only be for one reason.
Face masks? What do they tape it on the number plate? What do they do? How do they get it? That's hilarious.
Well, it's because the system is automatic. The camera is taking a photo of people's number plates as they go in the center part of the city. So then you get
Plus,
people,
you don't want your car to get corona, so you got to protect the car from corona.
You got to put your mask on the number plate.
Yeah. I was told everything should be masks, so I just put it on my car. I don't know what you're complaining about. That's funny.
That's true. People have creative ways to hide a part of the number plate so that the police can't get it full, right? And then I can.
But if there's a police person there, they can ask you to take it off. But if the system's automated, then you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that is the danger of that. That's probably going to happen here too eventually. But I guess Iran is a little bit more organized than some parts of the U.S. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Have you noticed any other interesting like differences or things that like you've explained to your family back in Australia that's like either I don't know that's noteworthy and difference of how life is there, like in terms of security or I don't know other.
Well, Tehran is very busy, so I kind of got used to there being people around. I used to live in this street, and at that time I was living. My old Persian teacher's sister actually she wasn't there at that time, so I was alone, and I was coming back from I think somewhere I can't remember where, and I arrived at 3 a.m. and I didn't have my key to open the building, and there were like 3 people washing their cars at 3 o'clock in the morning in my street, and they were so are you okay? Is everything all right? And I guess I kind of got used to this kind of very safe city environment. And so now when I go back to my own city, which is very small, it's less than 500,000 people, and it's quite spread out, you're not going to see 3 people washing their cars in your street at 3 a.m. And you start thinking like, oh, it's really quiet here. Is everything all right? Because that's the thing. Once you're in Tehran for a while, if it's quiet, you start thinking something's going on. Like, is it holidays? Is there something going on? Because why is it quiet? And then soon enough, you realize, oh yeah, it's just people washing their car some other place, or whatever. But that's just me coming from a small city and then living in a big city, I guess. Could have been like that anywhere in the world. But when I said about automation, I was thinking about bills because in Australia, when you get your electricity and your gas bills, they tend to come in your post box. Whereas in Iran, you can get a notification and you can see the picture of the guy who's coming to check your electricity meter in your apartment building. You can see him online. You can see that that's the guy who's going to be coming, so you know who and what they look like. And then you get, the bill again automatically in your account, and you pay it. There's some things that are automated here that, I mean, I've been away from Australia a long time, but I don't think that my mum gets a picture of the electricity meter checking guy on the day that he's going to arrive. So yeah, Tehran, because it's so big, it's like there's quite a lot of economy of scale going on. So there's an automation of the
don't have that in
sort of
Isfahan.
city.
We
You don't have that? You don't get to see the guy?
No, that's only for the mailman that we get. Like if like I can track where my parcel package is, and I can see
Yeah.
who's going to deliver that to me, like the name, the picture, and information, but not for the bills. So that's
Really? They show you the picture of the mailed person or mailman? Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I can check who is coming, because if like
there's nothing like that here. Not even with the fancy like UPS or FedEx or anything. It's just
it's quite surprising.
But that's kind of nice.
It is. It's very. You expect it after a while, and you're like, what? Australia doesn't. Anyone could be checking my electricity box. Who's the authorized person?
Yeah. Right.
But the other thing is that by the same token, like in Australia, we're used to a lot of privacy, and I rang up. I rang up the Snap, the online taxi, the main online taxi company, and then I also rang up Bidud, the bike hire company, and both of them said to me, "Oh, hello, Miss Webster," and I was like, "What?" And I realized, it's because they've got my name next to my phone number. So even when I ring up and say like, "Oh, excuse me, I have a problem with this bike," or I don't know, how can I transfer my current balance into a different kind of account on my Snap account, people are just talking to me like they know me. I don't know you. Why are you using my name? But I don't know if they're technically supposed to have access to the telephone, names, but in any case they do. So yeah, it can be surprising at times.
That is.
Yeah, I haven't had it.
It's weird.
Yeah, I would feel like surprised.
Yeah, it's kind of new. I haven't had it before. Normally people like random call centers don't know who you are, but they do.
But that could be because it's part of the app. When you sign in and you do the app, they get all of your information. So
it could be.
It's definitely had to do with the app, but still it's surprising like when people call out your name and
yeah, it is weird, especially when they struggle to pronounce your surname. Like, okay. Yep, that's fine. You know my name. Okay, all right.
Yeah. So you were saying that you got into Isfahan University for your Persian language course around 2007. Yep. How long did you stay there, and when did you go back to Australia and then come back to Iran again?
Oh, well, I was only there for one semester. I just got a 1 semester's leave from my uni to go. And again, I mean, talk about not getting insurance for going to Jordan. Well, there was no way I could get insurance for coming to Iran, but I was able to, she said, you can go to Iran, and when you come back, you can apply for credit, but you can't apply for credit before you go. So it's none of our business that's where you are. But when you come back, you can get credit. So that's what I did. So I got 2 units or something of Persian credit because I was just studying Persian at the University of Isfahan. At that time, there were only a few foreign students there. It was kind of a quiet time. There were maybe, I don't know, less than 10 students there, and me and
center.
And myself and a Korean friend of mine, and we should have been in the same class as this English girl and this other German girl, but we didn't really like how quickly they liked to study and how perfectionist they were. So we insisted that we needed our own class, that we weren't up to advanced. We needed an intermediate class. And so then we had our own class that was more focused on speaking. And I guess that's sort of what I'm more interested in language too. And at that time, they thought I had an Isfahan accent because all our teachers had Isfahani accents. And then it became very funny for Australians because I would speak in a mix of an Australian and Isfahani accent. and this was just hilarious. And I didn't like it, but now that I have just an Australian accent or speaking Tehrani Persian, it's kind of, I kind of sometimes feel sad, like I miss that accent. It was, and still regional accents can be difficult to understand, like Yazd, Mashhad, it can be hard to understand, but Esfahan, I'm fine. If I'm there for 1 hour, I can understand it, because that's how I learned. that kind of
because it's a very strong accent. It's not like I
yes,
would a very strong accent.
Yeah, it has a, I don't know how Hispanis would feel about this, but I would say it has a lilting tone, a little bit like a Indian accent that we might think about in English. So the lilting kind of way of talking is really nice in Esfahan. But sometimes people, everyone in Iran has their own ideas about regional accents. But anyway, we won't get sidetracked. So I was there for 4 months, and then I came back to Australia. I finished the rest of my undergraduate course, and then I worked for a few years. And Australia and Iran is not really much to talk about. We sometimes export grain when there's a drought in Iran. That's about the end of the story. There's intermittent sort of other things, and it depends on the sanctions, American sanctions. It depends on all sorts of things, but there's not. I guess I'm just saying that there wasn't an opportunity for me to work in an area that I might have studied during my undergraduate degree. So I kind of thought, oh well, that's okay. It's my own interest. I can write reports about other things. I can learn about small business and retirement arrangements in Australia and disability support, and these things are all interesting as well to me. But I also decided just before I turned 30 that I was going to just do something else, one more sort of chance to make a different choice. So that's when I came back to enroll in the master's program at the Faculty of World Studies in Tehran. And that was, I guess for me, a good opportunity to have a longer term visa to stay in Iran for a couple of years. And I was, of course, hoping to improve my language. And I guess the difficulty with that particular course is that it's mostly taught in English, so it's available for people who don't speak Persian as well. But there is also an option to write your thesis in Persian, which I did. So, yeah.
What was your thesis about?
Yes, I was continuing on this kind of idea about national unity. I was comparing the approaches of I think it was the Jalili negotiating team and the Zarif negotiating team in the nuclear negotiations. And
did you get
because
any of them or talk to any of them?
No, but it was very kind. I was able to speak to a couple of other people because I had a couple of interviews. Of course, I spoke to Dr. Izzadi at the faculty, and I also spoke to Mr. Zadeh, who was a member of parliament at that time, and I think he might have cried when the nuclear agreement was announced. So, yeah, I was able to interview a couple of people, but really, I guess at that particular point, it was kind of a bit. It was all very new, and as a foreigner in Iran, you could always be a spy, and so you can never, you can sort of, you do need to let people have their own domestic politics and their own affairs, and there's a, in Australia we have nasty domestic politics, and Iran has a bit of nasty domestic politics, and the best thing you can do as a foreigner is to not be involved, I think. So I guess, I now as a PhD student, I probably have a different opinion. I'm probably like, okay, well, I could probably talk to some different people now. But at that time, especially my Persian was less, my familiarity with the society was less. The easiest things to do is just be like, okay, this is something that's going on domestically in this country. I'm not going to understand it, this is not, my country. Just, I'll sit in here, I'll do my own analysis based on the primary sources that I can access, which at that point, because my spoken Persian is better than my written Persian, I used videos. So there were various videos of parliamentary inquiries. There were people giving interviews. And so there's plenty of primary source material that I was able to use without necessarily doing my own interviews.
Interesting. And did you ever at some point doing your thesis feel that some like professors or anyone at the faculty or elsewhere were trying to frame what you were going to write, or no, you had the freedom to write?
No, it's interesting that you can write anything you like about politics in Iran if you accept the government being the government. So the problem that Iranians have is that some people in the West would prefer not to recognize their government as the administration. So if you can sort of make that very low bar of accepting the administration as the Iranian administration, then anything you'd like to write about politics, you can write. Because, as I said, there is just a lot of discussion about politics in Iran. And yeah, I didn't feel at that point, Sertora, that anybody was telling me. I mean, if I'd been writing a thesis about, why is this government negotiating nuclear negotiations? They don't have the right to do it. I'm sure somebody would have spoken to me about that. But if I'm writing a thesis about, well, what are the different ways in which members of the government conduct themselves during nuclear negotiations? Well, I've already accepted that the government is the government, and so I'm not going to be, a problem for whatever I've got to say is not probably going to be a problem for anybody. I mean, there are a lot of people have a lot of different views in Iran. There's not really oh well, you have to write this.
Right.
What's interesting is you mentioned, as a foreigner, you're often perceived as a potential spy. But in
I
Iran,
wouldn't say often, but I would say that the amount of spies that there are, unfortunately, means that all of us have to be aware. And I'm pretty sure that the Iranian government knows I'm not a spy, because they're not so stupid as to let me live in the country for this long. Right. But then, we see such ridiculous things. Like we see people recently in the news, we've seen people like collecting dirt, and sending it to countries for analysis on whether it has nuclear whatever in it. These people are not people who are doing me any favors at all as a foreigner in Iran, and I find it really frustrating, because I'm the Iranian government. I'm sure it's intelligence, parts of its intelligence, and know where I've stayed. They probably know where I've traveled in Iran, probably what I do, and I'm fine with that, because I don't mind if they know where I've been on holidays. But the reason that they have to check is because there are these people who just insist on keeping on pursuing their own and other foreign countries' goals. And unfortunately, you have to accept that especially a Western person in Iran. You can't expect people to fully trust you, because the amount of people that are untrustworthy is unfortunately there.
Well, there's a huge effort outside. Like Iran is very much surrounded and oppressed by a larger system that wants to incorporate like a capitalist system, that neoliberal system that wants to wants to extract resources and financial profits from Iran. So
and that's a real threat. It's not just a matter of taste,
right.
So when we have this situation in which there are people that are doing things that are trying to threaten the country, well, this kind of leads inevitably to some level of mistrust.
But what I wanted to add to that, which is the interesting part, is like when I said often thought of as spies, I meant like, I guess I was more thinking like if you're poking around in the wrong place, you're going to be people are going to come with the idea that maybe you're a foreign spy. which you rightly said is for very good reasons. But the interesting thing to me is in Iran, there's plenty of Iranians who are anti-regime enough that they would do all that spying very willingly for a foreign government in order to overthrow. It's funny to me that there's this kind of like, oh, because I think a lot of people, everyone I came to Iran would come to Iran because they're very interested in Iran and they're very much appreciative. Many people are very appreciative of Iran for actually resisting because they see the dangers of having a fully homogenized world in one system. There's a great danger in that. It's very important to have yins and yangs. You need forces that resist each other, because if you just have one giant system, there is no ability to change. So anyway, I just find it fascinating that there's this kind of there isn't an acknowledgement of the fact that there's a very diverse situation in who may be collecting intelligence, because the Iranians I've met outside of Iran are much less pro Iran in its current state than I would be. I'm very neutral, but I find a lot of Iranians to be who leave Iran to be very much I don't know how to say it, but very
well, whining about the government is a national sport. I think it definitely
but in
is,
ways
but it doesn't
sound like they'd be coming from DC. They're coming out of the mouth of an Iranian. Like it's like a different. It's like that government is like illegitimate, and like the whole thing about everything you would read in like basically the New York Times about Iran, however you want to phrase that, this whole anti-regime narrative is shared by a lot of Iranians who aren't living in Iran, and probably some who
sure.
are.
And there's a whole field of post-colonial scholarship that talks about this very kind of issue about the way that people sort of start to regurgitate what it is that they're told from outside. But I think what I would say to that is that yes, but very recently we have people that are connected to the British Embassy collecting dirt or whatever it was from who collects dirt from close to a protected site from another country. Like if you're going to tell me that they were innocent, well, in what country can you do that as a foreigner or as a normal citizen? And unfortunately, I get really annoyed at these people because they're white, because they look like me, and because the way that they behave impact on the opportunities that I have to build my own connections as a white person in Iran. But at the same time, I do think that that Iran is a complex society. It's a very varied society. There's a lot of different people with a lot of different opinions, and that probably as a foreigner, you're not really trying to understand every single one of those kind of dynamics. So it's okay to be at a stage where you're like, okay, I'm foreign and I'm really trying to understand, but I'm not going to be giving my opinion on what Iran is to somebody else. And that's part of the kind of what we sometimes miss is in the West is when we prefer our own opinions, or as you say, expat opinions to people's opinions who are actually living in Iran and being Iranian. So I guess that's okay as a foreigner to have limits.
Yeah, the expat experience versus the people who live.
That's right.
Is huge. It's a huge difference. Like people just don't, and people here will be like even like a guy who served in Iraq. It'll be like, oh wow, he was really. It's like he didn't get anything like an Iraqi experience. Like I mean, but people here will kind of like think he like had an exotic experience. No, he lived on a base eating McDonald's and he was shooting at the Iraqis. Like there's no, I mean, yeah, maybe he had a translator that he liked that's like the far end of the expat experience. And then it just gets, even diplomats or whatever, they're so isolated from actual life that it's, yeah. Do you have friends like that in Iran who are pure expats? Like, do you see that divide there?
I don't really have much to do with many other foreigners. I have a few foreign friends. Very nice to have some foreign friends, but I don't know that many foreigners here. I'm not in like any foreign sort of, I'm not connected to the Australian embassy. Is quite isolated. I wouldn't say it's isolated. I would say that people who work in the Australian embassy tend to associate with other people who work in the Australian embassy. So not being one of those people, I don't have a whole lot to do with the embassy. I might see them once a year at an occasion where they invite, Australians, and it's very nice to be invited, but it's not something that it's really a part of my everyday life. But I guess I don't feel, that's one thing that I actually like about Iran is that, you're very much in the society, especially when you can speak Persian. And yeah, sure, I have an accent and I look foreign, but, as I said, people have a lot to say before they look too closely at your face. So, yeah, but at the same time, as I said, just because I've heard a lot of conversations on the street, again, that doesn't mean we're qualified to, have any opinion except for what I personally have heard on the street. And, I wouldn't want to take it too much further than that.
Yeah, true. So what happened to your studies? You did your master's in Iranian Studies at the Faculty of World Studies, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and then I traveled back to Australia first I stayed in Iran till my visa was finished. So that was a very nice time. I studied poetry at Dekhoda, the Persian language, institute. I had a really nice time not studying in Iran. But then after my visa ran out, then I went back to Australia, and I think I was there for nearly a year before I heard about a scholarship opportunity at the faculty to continue my studies as a Ph.D. student. And I hadn't ever imagined myself as a PhD student. I probably still don't, but that's how my life went. I applied and I was successful, so it was a great opportunity. And this time, I guess the other advantage for me was that this time I was in a class with Iranians in a Persian, speaking lessons. So it was people having to put up with me rather than me thinking that, I'm not improving my language. No, it was really me struggling with language in class. And that was, my language is probably not as good now as it was then during the coursework period, because I really had to give presentations in Persian. I had to write exams in Persian. It's just embarrassing. Probably wrote terrible things. Like, just my language is much better on a spoken level rather than writing. But yeah.
But are you doing your PhD in the Faculty of World Studies, or did you say you're doing it at different?
Yes. Yes, I'm doing it there. Yeah. So I finished the coursework, and then it's a little bit like the American system, I think. There's that you have a period of coursework, and then you have to write a thesis. And to be honest, I haven't started writing the thesis itself because it will be in Persian, and it will be based on a series of articles that I need to write in English, because we still have the sort of international academic article system is still very much English based. So my supervisor is trying to be kind to me by letting me write English articles first, but we'll see if I forget how to write in Persian in the interim.
Oh, okay. But do you have to write your dissertation in English, or?
Yeah, we have to write it in Persian. As you know, in the faculty, if people study Japanese,
you got disconnected.
have to write in Japanese. You write in Persian. That's how it is, at least at PhD level.
We didn't hear you for a few seconds. Can you say, like, you were saying that people who study Japanese in the faculty, and then?
Sorry. I'm sorry, Setora, could you ask again?
we didn't hear you for a few seconds. Were you saying that people who study Japanese at the faculty, and then we didn't hear you?
Oh, I was saying that people who study Japanese studies write in Japanese and American studies write in English, and at PhD levels, Iranian studies write in Persian.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's.
Well, that
Yeah.
sounds like it should be. I mean, if you're getting a PhD,
Yeah.
and what's
Russian.
your field of study? Persian studies? Is that what you said?
Iranian studies.
Iranian studies?
It's actually called contemporary Iranian studies, and that's important because there is an Iranian studies program offered at the language and literature faculty, I think, and it's very much about I can't remember the word in English. It's a kind of writing that's from ancient Persia.
Oh, calligraphy or something. Yeah.
No, like the language that's written on the stones.
Oh,
Like-
like Sanskrit or something like that? Like
It wouldn't be Sanskrit, but
what do you- like, oh yeah.
but
What's the-
anyway, it's ancient. So what we're studying in our course is today's Iran. It's not the legacy of the Persian Empire or something like that.
Oh, okay.
It's not like
Alright.
ancient
Yeah,
Greek
but
studies.
it does include politics as well, I guess, right?
That's right. So if you're studying ancient Greece, then I suppose ancient Persia, you probably study politics, but we study contemporary
yours-
politics.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's your theme in your thesis?
Well, I'm writing about the very original topic of America and Iran relations. And
Okay.
so my struggle is trying to say anything that's new about that. But if I ever come up with anything, I'll let you know.
You're still
But it is
struggling. Yeah, well,
interesting in the sense of I don't know. I mean, it's something that we read about all the time. We're kind of oversaturated with information, and when you try and do some research about it, that's a little bit, I guess, more detailed. Then I've been happy to learn new things. So
yeah.
Are you going
Well-
to mention the unilateral coercive measures by the United States against Iran, or the sanctions?
well, I'll tell you where I'm up to. American wars in the neighborhood. So I've been looking at Kuwait and Afghanistan and Iraq, and I'm coming from 1978. So I haven't got up to where you are yet, but I'm sure that I will get there.
So if you want to compare Iranian academia with the Australian academia, is there anything like, what are the highlights in terms of differences or similarities?
Well, I guess Australia, where a British colonial background, and we kind of pay attention to ranking, and we don't sort of speak in front of when it's not our turn to speak, kind of thing. Whereas Iranians haven't had the benefit of colonization, so they don't have this sense of not speaking back to authority. So it's quite interesting in Iran that when you and I say benefit of colonization, I shouldn't be misinterpreted. I am saying that with the irony, but in Iran we have people that, like students in first year, that will just be heckling, from the floor, in lectures, in formal guest speakers of very important people, and for me that was coming from Australia, where we're all like, oh, don't say that to that person. We don't have that in Iran, and that's quite interesting for me.
That's a Socratic method. That's very important for knowledge learning. It's ironic, most Western academics would see the value in that, but
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, but I guess on the downside of academia in Iran, I would say plagiarism. I would say expectations of certain lecturers that you will write like 10 essays, and nobody can write 10 essays a term. So they find some of the essays in other places that they don't have time to write themselves, and that this pressure that everybody has to publish in English, everybody has to, meet a 22-year-old who's like, yeah, I've published 10 ISO articles. Oh, well, how many of them did you write? And well, what kind of ISO were you talking about? And I guess that's different, because in Australia it's like, if you're a PhD student and you manage to publish an article, then you're quite excited. We don't have like this expectation that master's level students would necessarily, or even undergraduate students would have this amazing publication record. And I don't know really where that comes from, but I think that it's probably some systemic issues.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just from when I try and think of what's different and what's the same. It's very difficult
people are churning out articles somehow or another.
Yeah, there's an article production industry that's not necessarily related to the actual students who are submitting those articles.
Okay.
But yeah, it just makes it very difficult, and because it's hard to tell, who's really writing their own stuff and who's, then we have competition for positions of lecturer positions, and then those lecturers then also need to play that game of competition for publishing and writing, and I think that unfortunately that's something that's probably not specific to Iran in terms of the rush to publish your articles instead of do your research. So I guess that's also something that's the same.
That's a pity, because the whole dialogue becomes just muddy water. Like there's no, like it's like no, when everyone's just kind of throwing junk into the mix, like it really doesn't help the scientific or understanding.
No,
like publication becomes like a big burn pit.
And when you're here, like you're here for a while, you get to know who is really working really hard to produce their own research and their own study, and it becomes obvious. I can tell you, some names of some people who work really hard and who to do their own stuff. But I wouldn't say maybe across the whole university sector, that I wouldn't be able to describe the whole sector like that necessarily. But I guess that's. I don't think that necessarily. I don't know what the situation at Australian unis is like, except that I do know that it's also very competitive, and that also the the pressure to publish is also very strong. I don't know. It's very competitive. It's more competitive to get into university in Iran than it is in Australia. So. Yeah, that's something else that's different. I guess that's again something that as an expat I don't experience. But Iranian students have a huge competition and huge amount of effort that goes into their admission process.
Yeah,
so,
admission to public universities where you don't have to pay it's very competitive. I mean, there are a lot of private universities or other type of universities that you have to pay, but it's not as prestigious, and there's basically almost no competition there. But in certain fields and on certain universities, there is a very strict competition to get admitted to the university.
Yeah, and Iranians are very again very conscious of, everybody knows which universities that are good universities. People will like judge other people based on what university they went to, because everybody knows how difficult it was to get into that university, for example. But then, I mean, some people talk about the filter. That it's so difficult to get into university.
Yeah, like a cone. It's like a cone.
Yes.
Like an upside down cone. Like it's very, very difficult to get in, but then it's very easy to graduate. That's something that especially my generation heard a lot, because yeah, like there was a larger population around my age, and so there was even more competition to get into university.
Yeah. In Australia, my grade point average is 14 out of 20. So, and for me, that's a normal. It translates to between 70 and 74%, which is quite a good mark in Australia. But in Iran, you would be looking at that's pretty much failing. So Iranian students have very high expectations of once they get to uni, how their essays will be graded. And again, I wouldn't like to make a generalization, because one of my lecturers in particular prides himself on giving 4 or 5 out of 20 to people who deserve it. But a lot of lecturers the lowest mark they'll give us like 16 out of 20. And for me, that was really like surprising, because I was a good student at 14. So how can these people be getting 18? I don't understand. Like, it's just weird. Why are they even in university if they're already that good? But it's just a different system, and it's not that Iran is any easier. But it can look easier in terms of the grades. But once you're in Iran, then of course the game changes. So you can't get 14 in Iran like me.
That's true. Yeah, you get better marks in Iran.
It's basically impossible to fail.
Well, people fail, and like the lecturer I mentioned, he fails people for plagiarism, and I kind of don't mind that, because I think that every university system around the world that has a proper plagiarism policy is probably a good idea, and it's a lot easier in English, because what people don't realize when they submit to international journals is that there's a lot of software that picks up plagiarism, and when you're writing in Persian, you just don't have access to that software, because that software can't read Persian. So there is more kind of room to move when you're writing in a language other than English. But I'm waiting, because Iranians are very good at technology like that. They can do anything. So I reckon it won't be long before they come up with if there can be some. Well, I just suggest maybe to one of those people who develop software packages, if they could develop a plagiarism software package, please, for Iranian universities. I think it would be great. I mean, maybe there is one and I don't know about it. But
I cut into all those CVs of
yes.
ISO articles.
Yes. If you're 22, you shouldn't have published 10 articles unless you're some kind of, I forget what you call those people, but it's not normal.
Yeah, and then when you want to get a job, there's also like most universities, if you want to apply for for a lecturer or professor's job, then they also require you to have published a lot of articles. And for example, I have published only 2, one in Farsi and one in English, and I think that's
but you probably wrote them. I can tell from that number that you wrote them.
And that was a lot of work, and I can't publish more than that in like in a short time. And then like you're not even you're not even considered for the job if you have few, like 1 or 2 articles or no articles. You're not even considered for the job, because there are so many people with at least maybe 5. And I mean, there are a lot of people who write that many articles, but I'm sure there are a lot of they're under a lot of pressure, and they have to cancel everything else basically to be able to finish that article to get published. But not many people can do that.
No, and it's difficult, because the position that you're then in is that you're competing with some people who are worthy competitors for you, and maybe some people who maybe are not. So it's just tricky.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, publication list doesn't tell you much about the intellect behind it in that case.
Well, it can, but maybe it doesn't. It's just it's the doubt. That's the problem.
But even I think, like, I don't know, like because the standards by international journals, I mean, there's it's not always very creative. Sometimes you just have to know how to write to get published rather than be creative and in your own research. So that's also one thing that
Yes, and
can say that
unfortunately, go on.
yeah, we can say that like someone who hasn't published that isn't necessarily less intelligent, or that's how. But it doesn't mean like those who have necessarily have always like have done this with plagiarism or anything.
Yeah, but I guess another thing that I didn't mention before is that you're probably writing about politics, and there is a real disadvantage for you if you want to write anything that is pro-Iran in the international journal. If you want to get published, it's best to be writing about, opposition movements and how people only come to rallies for the free ice creams, because that is what is going to be recognized as, scholarship by a lot of those journal editors. And it's, not all men, not all journals, but it is some of them. And so that's probably, I would say, another sort of factor that will be working against you in that particular area.
Yeah,
I think it's not as bad for people who are writing, for example, in genetics and sort of tech areas.
It's because funding really shapes the narrative when it comes to like imperialist goals. It's incredible.
But one thing, like even I mean, maybe until a few years ago, there wasn't a problem for Iranian students of other fields rather than politics to publish their articles. But it got to a point where many journals would not even consider your manuscript because you were from Iran, from a state Iranian university, and that would automatically disqualify.
Even in not social science fields, you're saying this was
because I
wasn't aware.
Translation and editing, and I would see people referring to me to see if they had mistakes, and then when I read the letters, it was basically because they couldn't consider an Iranian the credit would go for that university, and that was a state university, which is like a public university that Iranian people who are like highly competitive can actually go to, and their manuscripts wouldn't be even considered. So
it's a direct outgrowth of sanctions. It's a direct result of sanctions because they're afraid of doing business with a Iranian government entity in the university, I guess.
Or is, has a particular ideology.
You were disconnected and we didn't hear you. Can you say it again?
Oh, I was just saying that it could be because there is a direct sanctions related issue, or it could just be the ideology of the journal that they're not interested in publishing Iranian ideas. That's just what they're,
that's true.
Where they're coming from.
Yeah, that's true.
So do you see yourself staying in Iran after you finish your PhD?
It's a good question because, I haven't been home for, nearly 3 years. And I obviously most looking forward to seeing my brother's son, who's now nearly 3, and my friends and their kids that are going to be quite grown up, and my parents have both retired. It's been such a big time for people in my sort of circle in Australia. But at the same time, it's like, oh, how am I going to cope? I had to tell my cousin recently what time I would probably arrive at her house on the 20th of August, because she likes to sort of know these things in advance. And I just thought, oh God, like I organized with Setore for this appointment. We both knew that it would be a kind of, oh, sorry, I'm not quite sure yet. Oh, what about this time? Okay. And we found a time, and we found a time soon. Whereas in Australia, it's a kind of, you kind of get used to how things work here. And I'm not sure how long I would live in Australia and be like, okay.
I mean, like planning everything to the second. Yeah. That is
Yeah,
very
or
annoying.
just the way that we have certain I don't know, there's a lot of change in Iran. Iran's a very sort of dynamic, especially Tehran is a very big city, so it's a very dynamic place to live. And if you're not here for 3 months, well, when you get back, you'll see things have changed. Whereas I come from a city where I don't know how much is going to have changed in the 3 years since I was last there. Maybe not as much as in 3 months in Tehran.
It was put on ice for about 2 years, so I think probably not much changed.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, it's a problem that Iranians who live abroad have, is that they think, oh yeah, I'd like to live overseas, and then they live overseas for a while, and then they're like, I'm bored. And I think that and that we're starting to get people coming back, you know, to Iran because, oh yeah, I'm just here visiting, you know. Oh yeah, you were bored. You want to come back and live in this society, but you just, you know, don't want to talk about that. But I can see that I don't know if I'll ever be like someone that lives in Australia for the rest of their life. Like, I don't think I will be going back and being like, okay, that's it. I'm just going to stay here now. I can see wanting to, I can see particular stages that I might want to be in Australia in my and my family's lives, definitely. But I wouldn't rule out living in Iran for a longer period. But again, I have a foreign passport, so you don't really need to ask me about this question because I choose to live in Iran and I like living in Iran. And I can leave if I feel unsafe. And I don't mean unsafe because of inside of the country forces. I mean, if I feel unsafe because of what's going on outside of Iran, that's making me feel unsafe in Iran, I can always leave. And that's not an option that people without a foreign passport have. You know, so I'm talking from a real position of privilege. But with that privilege, I do enjoy living in Iran, and I can certainly imagine Iran being an option for somewhere that I have lived for a number of years and wouldn't mind living for another period of years in my life, definitely.
What do you like the most about Iran, living in Iran? That's a very cliche question.
It is, and it's always hard to answer, but I do like when I get to Imam Khomeini Airport and I am all of a sudden in the society. Everybody's talking to me. Everybody has got an opinion about this, that, the other thing. Everybody looks at each other and, you know, judges people based on what they look like. Everybody is, you know, judging me. Everybody's, you know, asking questions. Everybody's assuming that you have some kind of commonality. And I guess in a very sort of individualist society, I mean, there are people living very individualist lives in Iran. I don't want to make a generalization, but I do think that the kind of warmth of Iranian society is what I most miss. And that, like, I do really embarrassing things in Australia. Like, I was in Melbourne and I got on a tram and there was nobody. There were like 2 people on the tram, and I went to sit next to one of those people, and they were like, because in Australia that's really bad. You should sit as far away from other people as you can. But I just forgot. I was like, well, why wouldn't you sit next to other people? Because you might have something to say.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a big difference in the West compared to other countries about, it's not just Australia, it's very much, yeah, it's the further north you get in Europe, the more it's like that. Like, the more it's like, stay away. Like, that's.
Yeah, and I think that we lose something because I'm a reasonably private person and I don't tell my life story to strangers, but at the same time, it doesn't hurt me to have a conversation with somebody on the bus or even to listen to somebody whining about something being expensive or whatever. Like, I feel more connected with the society when people are talking to me like, oh, you know, there's such and such a road. Have you ever tried to, you know, get to such and such a place at 6 p.m.? Oh, it's a disaster. Oh, oh, and then and people just talk to you like you could be their, long lost relative.
That's
But
awesome.
it's not that they're telling you their deepest, darkest secrets, or that they're even wanting you to tell them theirs. It's actually a way of relating to people that you don't know in society. Well, this is my opinion. I mean, I should ask Cesare, but for me, I don't see it necessarily as something that doesn't respect privacy, because privacy is important in Iran. But there's also this kind of the way that you can communicate with strangers and the warmth of
Right.
communicating with strangers that I find is not the same in the West. Because in the West, we're so worried about protecting our personal information. We don't want to say anything, whereas Iranians will never tell you their personal information that they don't want to tell you. But they've got a whole lot of other things that they're very happy to talk to you about.
That's funny.
So
Yeah,
you
Wow.
have
I think we look for things that we can like you said, it's not necessarily some personal information, but we look for something that we can discuss with people without getting into people's private space or anything. But yeah, I mean, like, it's very normal to see people, like random people who are absolutely unrelated and they don't know each other, like getting on the subway and starting to talk about like a lot of things without having known each other, and then you feel like they actually knew each other and they were like related because of how long they keep talking about things and how like excited they are to share their experiences with you and ask you questions about things. Yeah. Yeah, and I like that. I
That's
personally here I like that.
that's my innate nature. Like I've done that. I've been like maybe it's in the South in the U.S. we have more of that kind of a little bit more of that where you kind of chit chat with strangers. Because I remember when I lived up in in the DC area, like being on the DC Metro and just like seeing someone reading an interesting book and trying to like chat and start a conversation with them about the book or something, and people looking
Yeah.
at me like, "You're not from around here, are you?" Because you're not supposed to like not
Yeah.
supposed to engage like that. But it might just be my
Yeah.
own internal nature of like just wanting to. I don't understand how you're supposed to like socialize with people if you don't actually socialize with people. Like, what's the point? If you're gonna be around a bunch of people and you got a lot of spare time, like it's crazy to be cold and distant. But that's how public transportation is in most of the developed world.
Yeah, it's usually just me speaking to an old man. But the difference is that usually everyone else is listening to me talking to the old man. So that means they're interested. That means that
That's
we
true.
do want to talk to each other. We
That's
just
true.
feel shy, or we don't feel confident, or whereas people don't really have that problem in terms of lack of confidence to talk to strangers in Iran. As I said, there's a series of subjects that you can talk about with anybody, and it's not considered, it's not private, it's not something that requires confidence. It's
Wow,
just
that's
everyday
really
discussion.
a good
Yeah.
system. That's very good for your psychology, I think. I don't know. Yeah.
Did people talk to you, like random people? Did they talk to you about Corona and the pandemic?
Yeah, they usually, I mean, people talk a lot about whatever's happening in the situation. So for example, I caught a bus, and then I think it ran out of fuel, or there was some problem. Everyone had to get off the bus and catch the next bus. And so everybody started talking about that. And then the next bus that we all got on started making the same sound, the beep, that the other bus had been making. So then
Oh,
everyone's
no.
like, oh no, this bus is going to have the same problem. And then, and then people talk about, sometimes people are in fact having an argument. So I was listening to an argument over whether or not we should still be wearing masks, because somebody thought that somebody was telling somebody else on the bus to please wear a mask, and then it got a big issue, and everyone was like having their opinion on whether we should still be wearing masks on public transport or not. And it's never resolved, these issues, but the woman who wasn't wearing a mask, she put one on, so I think she lost. But and then we're talking about, then there was a woman who was rude, and then everybody was having an opinion on, well, what's rude, what's not rude, what's okay to do, what's not okay to do. Then obviously people talk about how expensive everything is. And again, that there's a whole lot of reasons behind that, including international reasons. But that's also another conversation topic that is very common because we're all having trouble. Like I was at the bread shop and I had to wait like 15 minutes and I still didn't get anywhere. And I decided, that's it, I'm going to like get bread some other time.
Mm-hmm.
Something that it does come up.
We didn't hear you after you said, what was the last thing we heard?
Bread. You were going to get bread another time.
Oh, yeah. I was just saying that talking about things being expensive or buying things is a topic that's one of those things that's not private. So I can talk about it with anybody and anybody can talk about it with me. And it's also quite different from the West because in the West, we don't talk about prices of, for example, we don't talk about our wages. Like I didn't ask you, hi, Chris. So what's your monthly wage? How much are you paying per month for rent? But in Iran, money issues some are private, but some are not. So,
asking people like how much they earn would be usually, I mean, especially if you don't really know them that much, would be something like they don't like to be asked. But yeah, like how much they're spending, and I bought this for that, or like, I'm paying this much rent, even like talking about how much they're spending. That's quite normal. You could ask them somehow.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. I guess as a foreigner, I get some extra questions in that regard because people are expecting me to be very rich. So and earning dollars, especially, they're just adding up how many dollars per hour I'm earning and what that would be. And
Wow.
And it gets more every day.
Never take into account the what it actually costs to live. This is interesting too when you're in another country where there's an economic disparity between the West and the.
That's right. It is a lot more expensive to live in Australia. But when I save money in my bank account in Australia, I know that it's probably going to be more or less the same next year and the year after and the year after. And that in Iran, it might not be the same the next month or the next month or the next month. And that's a really big difference between.
Exactly. And also stressful thing.
Yeah. I think that's actually one of the biggest, when people ask me about the biggest differences between Australia and Iran, a lot of things are the same. Like, I mean, not the same, I wouldn't like to say that, but a lot of things are similar, like the way people maybe might think about themselves, their families, their education, their jobs. But the situation that people in Iran live in terms of inflation is really different. That there's a surety that we have about the future. I mean, we have bushfires, we have various events in Australia that maybe can be unexpected, but we don't have to worry about if next month our salary is going to cover what we normally like to buy this month.
Well, we haven't up to this point, but with the way inflation, the way they've managed this, they're
Corona,
Corona, and they're trying to cook this Ukrainian situation into a way of blaming runaway inflation on Putin. I don't know. They might be we might all be in a. We might all be able to empathize with the.
We might be able to empathize better, but I don't think we're ever going to be in the situation of the Iranian inflation.
Right.
I normally think, Iranians whine about inflation a lot, and then recently I started keeping some dockets from when you buy like bread and biscuits and milk and stuff at the supermarket, and then you just watch I buy this yogurt. It's quite expensive, and last year it was 34 toman, which is about $1.50 or something, and then I realized around a few months later that it was then 75, and I was like, what, 75 toman? That's ridiculous. Now it's 93, and I don't know how much it's going to be next month.
How much is that in dollars? Did the price in dollars change, or did mostly the price in tomans change?
Both. So before it was like a bit over $1, and now it would be like maybe $4.
Oh wow! Okay.
But but people aren't earning dollars.
Right. No, that of course.
So
yeah.
I'm in a very privileged position when I can earn some, money from overseas, because when you're earning toman, then your wages don't go up to pay for yogurt being 30 toman compared to 90. And I know that, like my mum told me that a lettuce in Australia is now $9. Now, I do not have the problem of lettuces in Iran being that much more expensive. But I do think that, yes, as you said, there is inflation in the West at the moment, but I think the speed of it here is, I don't know what I think.
Yeah, it's been going up really fast over the past few months. It's something that I personally don't remember having experienced in my life. Maybe it was at a time when I wasn't paying things and my family was paying things, but now that I have to deal with that and keep track of my expenses, I see it's really,
you have to pay attention. I'm foreign. I even sometimes get paid in dollars, and yet I have to pay attention, because now I'm more careful to buy fruit and vegetables from a different area of the city, because if I buy them where I live, it's like 3 or 4 times as expensive. And those are the kind of calculations that we make in Australia all the time. Like, everybody knows, okay, you go to the farmers markets, you don't buy your fruit and vegetables from the ordinary shop. But Iranians are, I would say, a reasonably consumer kind of society. They're used to buying what they want to buy from, and it's not everybody, but a lot of people can buy what they want to buy from the supermarket without having a big think about it. But now everybody has to think about it. Exactly. It's not just people in the South or poor areas, it's everybody. That's been a real surprise.
The West is getting is just desserts. Like, they're, these sanctions that they put on Russia and Iran are now coming back around to bite and sanction the West. So the West, if the West simply removed sanctions on Russia, there would these price increases, or remove sanctions on Iran, a lot of the inflation would go away. So this is like, what we see here is a result of the pain that we're inflicting on countries like Iran, and that's the irony and the sadness of it. Is it just hurts everyone all around.
Well, yes, but we do not have a parallel media campaign to get rid of the presidential system of the United States of America.
I know. I wish there was, honestly. It's not much now that required to do it. It's just like, apparently a bicycle is too much for this guy. So, I don't know if you saw that footage. He fell flat off. He couldn't ride a bike, and he can't speak in sentences. So I don't even know if we do have honestly a presidential system here anymore. It's more like a geriatric, I don't know, like an old folks home. But it's yeah.
Okay, I think we gotta wrap it up here. That
All
was
right.
a good conversation. Yeah, but Janice, thank you so much for your time, and it was really nice to see you after a long time.
Yeah, really nice to see you too, Setala. Really,
It was nice
lovely to meet you, Chris. Yeah, it's been really enjoyable. Thank you.
Well, we'll keep in touch, and if any interesting things happen that would be interesting to talk about, we'll feel free to get in touch, and we'll get in touch with you, and maybe we can help spread more of an understanding of what it's like in Iran to the world, which is, I think, something that is greatly needed.
Yeah, that's a great thing that you're both doing. So thank you.
Thank you.